I've promised you NBA draft coverage, so here it is. Bobby Gerould from Hoop Obsession, a fantastic draft analyst, joins me on today's Locked On Kings episode, and he brings with him 4 names for the Sacramento Kings to keep their eye on at pick 13.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all off season long. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News, and you've been asking me for draft coverage. You've been asking me for breakdowns. Truth be told, I'm not smart enough to do that beyond give my subtle opinions based off of conversations that I've had and film that I've watched or highlights that I've watched. I'm certainly no college basketball analyst. I'm certainly no NBA draft analyst. I have guys that I like, guys that I think would fit. You know how I feel about this 13th pick overall. I think the Sacramento Kings would be better off trading this pick. But Bobby Gerould from Hoop Obsession feels differently. Bobby Gerould, the son of Kings radio broadcaster Gary Gerould, been covering the draft and covering the G League for a very, very long time. So he is going to be providing us not just 4 names, and I'm really excited for him to share these 4 names with you for the Kings to consider at 13. He's going to give us just insight on what he thinks the 13th pick is worth, the kind of names that or the history of that 13th pick and some of the names taken at that spot and kind of the success rate of that spot. He'll also talk about whether the Kings should go for a drafting for fit or go for the best player available. So there's a lot of great stuff in this conversation with Bobby Gerould. If you want to respond to anything that we're talking about, please do so. You're watching on YouTube. Get in the YouTube comment section down below. If you like any of the names that he puts out there, if you want to submit a name of your own for the Kings to take at 13, feel free to do that. You can hit me up on Twitter as well, at MattGeorgeSack, or feel free to email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. But for now, here's my conversation with Bobby Gerould. It's about time we start talking about this NBA draft. Even if I didn't expect or necessarily want the Sacramento Kings to be too worried about the draft this year, alas, here they are. They have the 13th pick. It's an asset that they have to use properly as part of this massive offseason. But I'll be honest with you, I'm the furthest thing from a draft expert possible. I have my guys that I like. I have my guesses, my predictions like so many others, but I really don't know what the heck I'm talking about. That's why I get Bobby Gerould to join me on the Locked On Kings podcast every single summer. And what I love about Bobby is not only does he do a phenomenal job breaking down the draft, when it comes to California Classic time and all these players that we're going to get to see in person inside the Golden One Center, Bobby knows all these guys and been watching these guys and studying these guys for months. So Bobby is a go-to source for all things G League, for drafting, for prospects, tomorrow's NBA stars. And he's nice enough to join me here on Locked On Kings. Bobby, it's so good to see you, my friend. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Matt. Good to be with you. Ready to talk some draft stuff. You know, I'm always down to talk basketball and draft stuff with you.
Bobby's always game. So Bobby, I'm going to start with a 2-parter here. We've heard this draft class labeled as a weak draft, quote unquote, weak draft. First off, do you kind of agree with that? And the second part is, when we talk about weak draft, are we talking about the total talent pool, or are we talking about just not as many stars or massive names at the top of the draft, certainly compared to Victor Wembanyama of last year?
Yeah, I think that's it, Matt. I think I think there's no surefire star power at the top of the draft. I think there are guys that, if they hit their most optimistic outcome, could become all-stars in the NBA. But when you look at it, it's not obvious. It's not going to knock you over the head. In past years where, like you mentioned, Wembanyama, you can go back to the Karl Anthony Towns draft or Luka Doncic, and, where there were players that you could really easily see, a big career for in your crystal ball. So to look at some of these guys, I think some of the guys at the top, you could nitpick different things with them. I mean, Alex Sarr, I think, is projected number one right now. But he doesn't have as explosive as he is, and as strong as he is. He doesn't have the greatest feel for the game of basketball as far as maybe some of the other projected number one picks. So I think in another year he might be a seventh or eighth type guy. But in this year's draft, he's number one. So I think that's a part of it. And then some of the other guys, you're really taking a big swing on what's to come. Zachary Ricochet is a talent that when you watch his highlights, you think, wow, man, this guy could really be something. But then there are also some questions about him. How athletic is he? And how is he going to be able to deal with the physicality of the NBA? I think from everything that I've heard, he really gets after it defensively. And I've watched 2 or 3 of his games from overseas, and kind of mixed results. You see the flashes, but you don't see a complete product yet. So I think that's kind of what people are talking about when they say this isn't the greatest draft. But a little bit further on down the line, I think it does have depth. I tweeted recently that I thought there were close to 80 players that are draftable, that I could see. That doesn't mean that they're all going to be, great players, but someone like Antonio Reeves right now from Kentucky, a 6'5" shooting guard, who's a little bit older. I have him just outside of my top 58. So he's a guy that'll probably be an undrafted free agent, but a guy who can clearly play basketball.
So it sounds like this is not a bad draft to be 13th. Obviously, the higher you are, the more valuable to pick, period. And the Kings, as you know, Bobby, are no strangers to being a high lottery team. But here they are in the 13th spot. And recently, Bobby, I was just going through kind of NBA history over the last 30 years and looking at what 13th has produced. And there's actually been some huge names, especially in recent memory, that have gone 13, from Donovan Mitchell, Devin Booker, Tyler Hero. I mean, like, we forget Tyrese Halliburton was drafted 12th. In Kings history, Peja Stojakovic drafted 14th. So there's value around that range. We'll talk about in a little bit, because I have my hesitations about whether adding a rookie to this team is the right move right now, and we can get to that a little bit later on. But it's not like because the 13th pick is out of the top 10 or even top 12 that there's not value to be had there. What do you think about that spot in particular in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you'd like to be higher, but I agree. It gives it historically has given other teams room to screw up. Basically, it's, you know what I mean. And then the Sharks come in who are really sharp, and they end up taking a player that should have been drafted a little bit higher. I mean, you went through some of it, from Donovan Mitchell to I'm looking here at some of those past guys, Jalen Duren, who is someone I really like from a couple of years ago. He's going to look like a steal, especially when you consider that guys like Ousmane Dieng and Johnny Davis were taken in front of him. So, yeah, I think there's obviously a chance to get it right, but then there's also been some pretty bad misses. Jerome Robinson comes to mind from maybe 4 or 5 years ago, who was the 13th pick. So it just depends. You would think that Wes Wilcox and Monty McNair are 2 sharp guys, 2 data informed guys that are going to hopefully make the right decision here. And yeah, a 13th pick, should you add a rookie to this group? I kind of feel like maybe it's not a bad idea, and bear with me here, and I'll tell you why. It's like looking at the Pacers right now. They have a bunch of guys on rookie scale contracts, and that's really important to team and roster structure construction. When you look at what some of the successful teams have done, I mean, with the salary cap the way it is, there's only so many big fat contracts that you can have. And then it's going to be up to the sharp GMs to fill out the roster with guys that are value and with guys that are affordable. Looking at the Indiana Pacers right now, they're getting good use out of Nebhart, who's on a rookie scale contract, Ben Shepherd, who is a rookie. And you could go through a bunch of guys that are on rookie scale. I think they have 4 or 5 of them right now on their roster. And so as far as the roster construction is concerned, it's always good if you can find a guy who can help you out a little bit and not be making, breaking the bank. And it looks like, they've got Domas is already paid. Fox is going to have an extension coming up. Keegan Murray at some point is probably, although that remains to be seen exactly where he's going to be. And then, of course, Monk, which you've got to find a way to maintain Malik Monk or to retain him. So, I think that, and then the flip side of it is, like you said, Domas and Fox are in their prime right now, and it's go time for the Sacramento Kings. It is time to maximize this roster and to try to make it as best as you possibly can. My issue with that, though, is that some of the people that have been mentioned in trades, possible scenarios, let's take Brandon Ingram, for example.
Yep.
He's only played in, parts of the last 3 seasons. He's not a dependable, everyday available guy as good as he is. And he makes $36 million a year coming up. So I think those kind of things are tough. You hear talk about Kyle Kuzma. He makes a ton of money as well. And I have some concerns about him regardless. It's just, I don't know if I don't want to make this into a Kyle Kuzma show, but I just have some concerns. I've seen some things from him about how he accepts coaching or doesn't accept coaching that concern me a little bit. Jeremy Grant up in Portland, another guy who's just making way too much money for what he produces. So I think it'd be wise for the Kings to try to maybe try again, and and instead of getting a Chris Duarte who didn't really hit, you need to find someone who does hit and fill in some of those roster spots with guys that are a little bit more affordable, but that also hit. And then the key to it all, of course, is Mike Brown has to like them and trust them, or it's not going to make a lick of difference anyway. They had JaVale McGee on the roster all last year, started out playing pretty well, and then fell off the face of the earth. It was almost like he had a season-ending injury because Mike just didn't want to go to him anymore. So, that's got to be a part of it.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by FanDuel, and it is winner take all time in both the NBA and the NHL. You got the NBA playoffs, the Stanley Cup playoffs, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Speaking of spreads, let's take a look at the spread for Game 1 of the Boston Celtics and Indiana Pacers. Now, at the time of this recording, this game hasn't started yet. Depending upon when you're listening, the game might be going on. It might be over. But as of right now, as of the time of this recording, you go on FanDuel, and the Pacers are 10-point underdogs. 10-point favorites for the Boston Celtics at home in the TD Garden. They are obviously rested. They've been waiting for a while. The Pacers just got out of a 7-game series with the New York Knicks. 10 points kind of seems high, even if I think Boston is going to win this series in 5 games. I think 10 points seems kind of high. So maybe I would go the route of the Pacers plus 10 tonight. But who knows, right? We'll see if it covers. That's just an example of the many ways that you can play on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So let's keep running with this ball of the Kings are planning on or do make a selection on draft night, do decide to take a player at 13. Bobby, we've seen the Kings way too many times towards the top of the lottery, and it's the constant debate of, do you go for a fit pick or do you go just for best talent available? And I feel like 13 gives you a little more flexibility than necessarily a top 4, top 5, where the Kings have gotten themselves in trouble in the past, going for more of a need and passing on a generational talent. In fact, they've done that many, 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 many times. At 13, I feel like, especially with the position the Sacramento Kings are in, where their holes are obvious, especially when it comes to wing depth, when it comes to kind of lack of athleticism, of length, of kind of defensive perimeter prowess and presence. I feel like you can afford at 13 to maybe look for that a little bit more than a 19-year-old coming out of college who has tremendous amount of upside and could be an all-star level talent in 3 or 4 years. But in 3 or 4 years, the Kings are hoping to have hoisted a championship at that point and looking for 2, right? So what do you think about 13 and going more of the direction of fit and team need versus best talent available?
Yeah, I agree that you get yourself in trouble when you start to think about fit. I would always rather draft the best player on my board and adjust accordingly afterwards. To me, that's I think that's what the best teams do. And this wasn't a draft thing, but let's look at the Mavericks and their path right now and what they've done to, they added Grant Williams last summer, and myself and some others were like, I don't know about that. And it became pretty evident about, by December or so that this wasn't working. And so they went ahead and adjusted, and that's the best thing you can do is be quick about it. If it's not happening, make the move. And so they make a move to get PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, a couple of guys who, they're not great NBA players. I'd say average to above average NBA players right there, but they really made a difference in their team because they went from an inefficient guy in Grant Williams, shipped him off to Charlotte. Omax Prosper at the very beginning of the season and in preseason play was getting some run, but he was a rookie, like you said, an unproven guy who may be something 3 or 4 years down the road, but he doesn't fit into their plans right now. And they replaced him with a couple of, kind of above average guys. So I would rather see the Kings kind of go in that direction. There are 3 players that I like better than the consensus that'll be around that area that I think would be available at 13. The first one I'd start with is Tyler Smith out of the G League. He played for G League Ignite. He's 6'9", 224. I believe he can stretch the floor well enough to be a power forward in the NBA. He's only 19 years old, so he's gonna be one of those guys that's gonna take a little more time to develop. But if he hits, you really could possibly have something in 3 or 4 years. So that's one of them. Another way to go, and I don't know how you'll feel about this one, is Zach Edey. I actually am a fan of Zach Edey's. I think he's polarizing to a lot of people. Some people just think he'll never make it in the NBA. But I watched him go from being a kind of a tubby freshman who looked really lost to a guy who has steadily, incrementally improved, got his body completely changed, got into I'd say he's in NBA condition right now. At 7'4", 299 pounds, Matt, he's massive. He's immovable. And sure, he's, last night in watching the game, I saw Rudy Gobert have some really awkward offensive moments, but there was no doubt that he was a difference maker in the game. Now, I'm not saying Zach Edey will be the defensive stopper. That's not what I'm getting at all here. I'm saying that there's going to be some awkward moments, as there often is with big men. Sometimes big men are just awkward. But I'm looking at the totality of what he would bring versus how many awkward moments there would be. And I just think that he's so massive. His legs are like tree trunks. He's a defensive rebounder that is fantastic. I mean, he puts both hands on the ball, grabs it strong. He's wide. He's difficult to get around. And then offensively, he's not just a throw-in. I mean, if you throw him the ball, he's going to, if you single coverage him, he's going to score. So he's going to be someone who demands a double team, which allows for quick ball movement and to get it to open shooters. He can go left hand. He can go right hand. He can hit from 15 feet. I'm a Zach Edey believer. And so if he's there on the board at 13, I think he's someone that the Kings definitely should take a look at. I would much prefer to have Zach Edey than a 20, 24, 25 version of Jonas Valanciunas, who some people have have said is someone that the Kings are interested in. I just think Jonas has gotten to the point now where he's lost so many steps that his defense just isn't up to snuff anymore. So Zach Edey would be another one. And then a third one around that range that I think will be on the board is Devin Carter from Providence. Now he's a smaller guard. He's 6'2", 193 pounds, shooting guard, super athletic kid that plays both ends. But, you know, at the end of the day, you worry a little bit about his size at 6'2", although he does have long arms. I think he's got like a 6'8" wingspan. So those are three guys that I would consider. I also like Khalil Ware from Indiana, who is a big man, 7 foot, 230 pounder, who can stretch the floor a little bit. There were some questions about him and his kind of desire and love after his freshman season in college basketball, but then he transferred to Indiana, and I heard nothing but good things about what he did in the past year at Indiana. So there's four guys right there that I think you know, the Kings should strongly take a look at, and then you never know what's going to happen, Matt. I mean, there's always a chance that one of those guys that you thought wasn't going to be available suddenly, you know, slides to you. So they should be on their toes and be ready to, you know, make every move possible.
Something that jumped out to me about the four names that you gave there, two of them are upperclassmen, and even Khalil Ware, he's a sophomore, but he's 20 years old as of right now. So he'll be close to 21 by the time his rookie season begins. Monty McNair has shown to have a type, right? He tends to trend towards the older rookies that are more NBA ready, and it makes a whole lot of sense for the Kings to try and go that route right now when they're in a win now mode. Bobby, do you have any kind of, I mean, I'm sure it's subjective based off of the player and based off the year in the draft, so it all changes. But do you have kind of a general rule of thumb about younger rookie prospects that you have more time with and you can kind of mold more versus older rookie prospects who are more NBA ready, their bodies are more NBA ready, but they're a little more are who they are type guys?
Yeah, I don't have a hard set rule. I mean, one of the things I definitely factor in is the age. You know, if you look at my hoop obsession calculation rating, which I do for players, definitely from freshman to sophomore, there's a certain mathematical jump that I expect. And so I'm aware of what those averages are. And so I can give a little bit of a projection on what a guy might look like who's a freshman versus a sophomore. So I do try to consider all of those things. But at the end of the day, I think some of that gets overblown, you know, whether a guy's 22 or whether a guy's 19, you know, if we're talking about a lottery pick, you would think that it's someone who's going to be in the league for 8 to 10 years. And if they're 22, so what? They're 30 at the end of that 8-year run versus 27. I mean, what's the big difference? So you get a little more mature player, someone with a little more seasoning, a little more experience. Yeah, I don't have any problem with that one way or the other. I do think, though, there is something to be said for you know, some of these guys, like I mentioned, Ricochet, he'll be long gone by the 13th pick. He's going to be one of the top picks in this draft. He's a guy right now that if you just looked at the numbers and ranked him, he might be in the top 50, you know, but definitely not in the top 5. So you're really banking on him being able to make that jump that most do when they go from being 19 to 20 years old or from freshman to sophomore. You know, type of deal. And the same thing with, you know, Ron Holland from the G League. He's another guy that really can't shoot right now, but does a lot of other things. And you just hope that, you know, you're not drafting the next Josh Jackson there, you know. Now, Josh Jackson had some other outside things going on that, you know, prevented him from being the prospect that people thought he was going to be. But at the same time, you know, it's scary, man, because there are guys, you know, there are James Wisemans of the world. There was a guy a few years ago, Domboya, if you remember him. I think he went 15th after a lot of people said that he was going to be a lottery pick. You know, Cam Reddish, people looked at Cam Reddish and really thought, you know, here's the next Paul George. If I had heard that one more time, right?
Guilty.
Right,
Guilty.
yeah, but it hasn't happened, right? So, and I screw him up too. I was a fan of Bryce Williams from North Carolina a few years ago. Really thought he was going to be a player, and it turns out he had like a cup of coffee with the Clippers, and that was it. It was like off to Europe. So, it's an inexact science. We're dealing with 19 and 20-year-old kids, and you never know. I mean, and so that's where the guys that really do their homework and get into the details about what kind of player these guys are, I love Colby Jones as a early second round pick from last year, and I just thought he was one of the mature NBA ready guys, in every aspect too, from the way he hits the weight room to how he conducts himself. I like those type of players. The guys that I trust are gym rats, guys that you believe love the game of basketball. And that also has gotten me in trouble sometimes. Anthony Edwards was a guy who I didn't believe he loved the game, right?
Guilty too. I've been dead wrong.
Yeah, in college, he really wasn't that good. Like, I watched his games and I was like, okay, I see the talent.
Yeah.
But I just see a guy who he was just out there jacking threes and looked like he didn't give a rip about, and their team was awful. They only won like 7 games or something like that. And
well, look, we weren't alone either, because Steve Kerr kind of told him the same thing in the pre-draft process, and that kind of woke him up too. So credit to Anthony Edwards, but I mean, that's the draft for you, right? That's the job that we're trying to do here.
Absolutely. And so Alex Sarr at the top of the draft, sure, there's, like I said, there's a possibility that he becomes a star, but what if he's Jackson Hayes 2.0? You know what I mean? And there's not a lot of difference in what their skill set is at this point. So, and Alex Sarr is at the top of my board. So that's kind of telling you, Donovan Clingan, I think, I have Donovan Clingan second right now. And my worry there is, I've seen that body type before. And, what's Donovan Clingan going to look like when he's 26 or 27 years old with that big 7'2"? He's already slow. He was one of the slowest guys at the draft combine. And so that has me really thinking about what's the future for this guy, because just as some guys progress, some guys might regress, right? So there could be a chance that he just tubs up a little bit when he gets his man weight on, like we all do when we turn 25, 26, 27 years old. And he's going to have to work doubly hard, I think, because of just how he was built and his frame, to stay in shape and to be able to do things at the NBA level. So questions abound, man. I mean, at the top of the draft, and I'd be scared to death. And so, maybe it is a good thing that the Kings have a little less pressure and can pick somewhere around 13.
All season long, Locked On Kings has been brought to you by Prize Picks, and that does not stop with the off season, because you can play Prize Picks year round, baby. What is Prize Picks? Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. So essentially the way it works, let's say for the Celtics and Pacers game tonight, let's say you want to pick 3 things. Let's say you take more than 26.5 points for Jaylen Brown. Let's say you take more than 9.5 assists for Tyrese Halliburton. And let's say you take more than 2.5 3-pointers made by Miles Turner. Well, you get all 3 of those right. Hey, it's a big payday, and you can go up to 6 guys. Plus, they have Demons and Goblins picks for you. Now, the Goblins picks are a little bit easier for players to accomplish at a slightly less payout, but you can use that to end up making a 5-pick win, a 6-pick win pretty easy. Or you can go dangerous. You can go the Demons route and really cash in, potentially win up to 100 times your money. Prize Picks is so much fun, so many creative ways you can play, including involving MLB games into your selections during an NBA game. So it's a ton of fun. Go and download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for first deposit match up to $100 and play Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. I have one more Kings related question and a couple of just general your thoughts on kind of the draft and the storylines questions. The last Kings related question, I mean, you know Sacramento, you know the pride in Sacramento, especially for our local guys. They're going to be throwing tomatoes at me, Bobby, if I don't ask you about Jared McCain and your thoughts on the Sacramento native playing at Duke, had some big moments in the tournament. I don't necessarily know if the Kings need to look at a player of his kind of play style, or they seem to have that position in abundance, especially if they bring Malik Monk back. But anytime there's a Sacramento guy, Sacramentans are going to be interested in seeing him in a Kings uniform and representing this city at the NBA level. What do you think about Jared and just where he could go in the draft, what kind of skill sets he's bringing to the NBA, and if the Kings should have relative interest beyond the hometown story?
I think he's probably the best shooter in the draft, Jared McCain. I really do. And he's skilled. You know, if you watched him, it didn't take long. Probably maybe the second game I watched at Duke this year was like, because I didn't get it at first either. I saw the projections on, you know, some different mock drafts. Okay, this kid's supposed to be a prospect. Let's check him out. And then about the second game, I was like, oh, okay, he sees things that other players don't see. He plays with a maturity. He has deep shooting range. He's confident in his shot. Really good offensive player. Now, digging a little deeper, he's not a great athlete. He's an under the rim player, not going to be someone who's going to be finishing or getting to the basket. Really, I think in the NBA, he's a shooter, and you would be relying on that skill set big time. Not a great defender either. Was a minus defender at Duke. So. For me, 13 feels a little early for Jared McCain. I have seen him mocked to the Kings at 13. And I'm not saying that I would hate it, because who doesn't love a guy who can really shoot the ball? Sure. And he plays with a joy. He plays with a smile on his face, and seems like a genuinely good human being. And there is something to be said for that. But there's also sometimes there's a difference between that type of a player and a guy who's just a dog, who's a basketball player who wants to stop his opponent more than he wants to shoot 3-pointers and do TikTok videos. And so, I'm not trying to diss the kid for any of that. I mean, more power to him if that's what his thing is. And it doesn't seem like it gets in the way with playing basketball, but the under the rim stuff and the limitations athletically on the defensive end would definitely have me concerned. I don't think we're looking at, the next Steph Curry or anything like that, despite what a good shooter he is. And I could be wrong, but I like his feel. I like watching him play, but at 13, it feels like maybe that's a little early.
Gotcha. So 2 kind of general draft philosophy questions. This one, I mean, goes beyond this draft this year, but the growth of this game internationally is incredible. And you look at we have international player after international player winning MVP over and over again, from Jokic to Embiid to look what Luka Doncic is doing. He still hasn't won an MVP yet. Technically, it's not European, but Shai Gilgeous-Alexander out of Canada, and he had the great year leading the Oklahoma City Thunder. So, I mean, basketball, the top players, the best players in the world aren't necessarily always, or really at all at this point, coming from the United States. That's kind of the old regime, and the new guard is all European and international. You have, once again, you look at these mock drafts, you look at these draft boards, a lot of international talent coming out of the top of the draft, especially from France. France is just turning out prospect after prospect after prospect. Yeah. What's your just opinion and your vibe on the growth of the game and the amount of international talent that's coming to the NBA and really making the league tremendously better?
Yeah, I think, as we've all grown up, and the world has gotten smaller and shrunk with the internet and with our access to it used to be 5 years ago, if I wanted to watch one of those prospects, it was a real struggle to find it. Maybe you could get some grainy highlights, and you're kind of relying on other people's opinions. But in this day and age, you can, if you want to see Zachary Ricochet full games, not a problem. You can dial them right up, and you can watch them. So I just think the world's gotten better at how they prepare at a young age to play basketball, and it makes sense, right? I mean, why should the best players only be from America? I mean, certainly there are, and I think Africa is where. That's the untapped ground right now as far as NBA, NBA has some programs in there right now that they're working with the youth to try to generate better players. And you're seeing a lot of these kids, even if they're not in the NBA, they're showing up on college basketball rosters.
Yep.
And so I think that, it's probably only going to continue that way. Alex Sarr right now is definitely the number one prospect. He played this year in Australia for Perth. Zachary Richichet is from France. He'll go top 5. Nikola Topic, who is hurt right now, is another guard that'll be a lottery pick. So, you're correct. It's it is what it is, and some of these other kids I think can really play too, like Nikola Jurisic. People didn't really know much about him until the combine, I think, unless you were watching a bunch of European basketball, and then you saw at the combine that here's a kid who's definitely has the size to play in the NBA, and looked like he showed the skill set to compete in the NBA as well, from what I could see. Tijan Salon is another guy from France who should be on your radar. So there's a very good chance that one of those players, is going to be another guy from Europe that we're all going to have to take note of.
Remember when the reaction when Peja Stojakovic was drafted here in Sacramento and nobody really knew much about him? Imagine if we had the access today back then to see Peja come into the league too, and how much of a sharpshooter he was. Although he made a name for himself pretty quickly here in Sacramento. Bobby, go for it.
A quick story on that. Back in my day, I used to work for the Kings, and the Peja draft, I was the host of the in-arena draft party that year. And so when the pick came down, Jeff Petrie wasn't available and Jerry Reynolds was there, but basically they left me up to hang on the podium to announce who the pick was. And I'm like, well, we're picking Predrag Stojakovic.
We all did it. We all did it.
Predrag Stojakovic. And we didn't know anything about him. There was some grainy video of him making threes. And then we all pretty much, learned very quickly what a sharpshooter and assassin that this guy was. So it's been cool to see the evolution of some of that. Going back to Sarunas Marciulionis and some of those players was one of the original guys from overseas that we really fell in love with.
Bobby, what's your opinion on the Bronny James situation too? You talk about an impossible shadow to get out from underneath. And I see the coverage, I see the conversations. They just simply won't let the young man be himself. And look, you can see the issues with his game. You can see that he is not his father. You can see that he is not a top talent, and that where he goes might have more to do with LeBron and free agency than him actually becoming an NBA player. That being said, I just think the pressure that some people have on him, I guess it's going to happen because of your dad, but I also think it's a little over the top. I want to see what he can be by himself. I know I've seen clips of him out of the draft combine. Things seem to be going well in some cases over there. Just what's your opinion on Bronny, whether it's as a prospect or just everything that he's going through? He's certainly not the first NBA legend's son to go through this and try and make his way into the league. But we've been talking about Bronny for long time, since before he was in high school, and now his moment potentially could be realized, and I feel like it's being met with more negativity than positivity.
Yeah, I think I got pretty frustrated with ESPN's coverage on the combine because it was so much Bronny. It was almost like Bronny was going to be the number one pick in the draft. And this is a Prince cat here who's
hi Prince,
saying hello.
Hello, hey. Prince.
Hey. There you
Prince,
go.
what do you think of Bronny?
Yeah. He says Bronny is a borderline NBA prospect. So I give the kid, and you hit it right on the head, it's not Bronny's fault. He's not the one who's making the decision it's a producer from ESPN and someone who's trying to capitalize on all the followers that Bronny has and make sure that, we're giving this guy some TV time.
Sure.
I would give the kid a little bit of grace because he did go through a real serious heart issue, right? And then, and then to come in and be, thrown into college basketball, just coming off of that, missing basically what is the college version of a training camp. Didn't join the team until the season was already, fully running.
Right.
So from that standpoint, when you look at his statistics, it's probably a little bit unfair. Athletically, I think he does have the required athleticism to play in the NBA, but his shot isn't there and his feel isn't there. Probably better shooter than his feel from what I've been able to see so far. He did not look good on the first day of the combine. He looked much better and more comfortable on the second day of the combine. But at the end of the day, he's like 98th on my list or something, right now. And so that's an undrafted free agent at best, and maybe he is someone that because of all the things he's gone through, just needs a little bit more time. I'm not saying that he can't play in the NBA because, again, athletically, I think he can. But he just has a long way to go as far as his skill and feel for the game. At least that's how I see it right now. I bet he still gets drafted, though. I mean, I bet he still gets drafted by the Lakers.
Well, we will have to wait and see with that. Bobby, I can't wait to have you back on before the California Classic to talk about some of the names that are going to be coming through Sacramento. But before that, I mean, we got a lot to build up still to the draft. I know you're working hard every single day. You got Hoop Obsession, everything like that. Let everybody know what you're doing, what they can expect from your draft coverage. And I mean, they can't learn nearly enough from me compared to what they can learn from you in the build up to this draft. So where can people find your coverage and your breakdowns of all these prospects heading into draft night?
Okay, well, probably there's two ways. Best way one is to follow me on Twitter X, which is right there. And usually from now until the draft, and we've got like 4.5 weeks to go to the draft. So I would give that disclaimer right now about anything that I've said on this podcast.
A lot can change quickly.
That we are still early in the process. Right now, what I'm doing on Hoop Obsession is getting into the individual breakdown. So if you were to go on that site right now and look at my NBA draft rankings, you might click on a player and see just highlights. If you ultimately, you'll click on a player and you will see a capsule like I have for Alex Sarr, which is a short little breakdown of kind of a quick read of, what my thoughts are on the player, where I think he's likely to go, stuff like that, as well as the video. And ultimately, I hope to have 75 or 80 of those capsules done by draft time. So, every day I'll be adding 3 or 4 more guys, really concentrating on them and breaking down their games. And what that does is, as I do that, I just become more and more familiar, and it gives me the opportunity to say, I like this guy better than that guy. And there's a lot of movement on the draft board, as that goes. And as information comes along, sometimes I remember a few years ago, Trey Murphy was someone I wasn't real high on. And I had a chance to speak with someone who I respect a lot in the NBA, who told me I needed to reconsider Trey Murphy. And so I ended up moving him up 15, 20 spots on my draft board, and it still wasn't high enough, ultimately, as we look back on it now. So you've got to be open to changing your mind. You've got to be open to trusting the people that you trust, because I don't have the access that, an NBA. I wish I did. I wish I had a staff, and I wish I had access. I think I might be dangerous, but I don't. You know what I mean? So I'm just doing the best I can as one guy, and whereas teams like the Kings, they're looking at who might be there at 13 and 45. I'm trying to look at 80, the top 80 to 86 players, because that's how many. There'll be 58 drafted, but by the time you add all the undrafted free agents to rosters and stuff like that, it'll be around 80 players that'll be new guys that from this class that will, join into the NBA. And likewise, there might be 80 guys who are going to get booted from the NBA, So it's all about knowing the landscape, really having an idea of where these guys might fit in at individual positions. And that's something that, even though I get some of them wrong, I am pretty proud of some of the selections that I've had in the past and some of the opinions I've had in the past. And I hope to continue it just by working hard and really caring, because that's what I do.
Well, in order to do this job and all those breakdowns and all those hours, in order to do it correctly, you have to be obviously passionate about it. And Bobby, you're very much that, and the passion shines through every time we have a conversation. So I'm very, very thankful for you to always be willing to take the time here on Locked On Kings. Selfishly, I love it. It does wonders for the podcast, does wonders for the breakdown. So you're an absolute pro, my guy. And I agree. If you had a full staff, boy, Bobby Gerould would be dangerous in terms of the draft breakdowns. But I've always valued your opinion, and you've said some things and said some names on this podcast over the years, Bobby, and you've been spot on. So I'm excited to see how correct you are with this draft and the process over the next month or so, my friend. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for making the time. Let's do this again right before Cali Classic.
You're too kind, Matt. Thank you.